And what is up, everyone? I am Joe DeHoyos. I am host of Beyond the Woodline. Real quick before we get started, um, we're not doing that. Just so some of you guys who don't know, I am part of the JRG, which stands for the Jevning Research Group. It's headed up and founded by Mr. William Jevning. He's got like 50 years of experience in this Bigfoot world. He was really good friends with Renee DeHenden and John Green. They're two of the four guys that are considered, the pioneers of the Bigfoot world. Um, yeah, he's been friends. Well, they're gone by now, but um, yeah, he was friends with them when he was a teenager when he had his first sighting. And we've got teams in Ohio, New York State, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, of course, where I'm at, Tennessee, Oregon, Washington, California, New Mexico, and I always forget a couple of the other states. I don't even know. I said Oklahoma. I think we have Oklahoma also. Um, if you're interested in joining this group, shoot me a message or an email rather at beyond.woodline@gmail.com. We'll get you guys started. We will vet you. We will vet anyone we set you up with. If we don't have a team in your state, we probably know somebody in that state we can hook you up with because we do network with a bunch of other people. Or you can just start your own team, and that's great too if you want to do that. But like I said, we will vet you. We will vet anyone that we set you up with, and we ask that you do the same. Just because you just never know. One thing we always like to say is you got to research the researcher. So yeah, do that. You got to do your part too. Um, but yeah, with that being said, I know you guys don't tune in to hear me ramble on all night. I have with me from the Cryptid Wilderness Research Podcast, Mr. Daniel Becker. Daniel, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I'm
Thanks
doing
for
great.
having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. I do appreciate it. I know you're way up north, and it's kind of chilly where you're at. So if you don't mind, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what got you started in this crazy field we find ourselves in?
All right, so my name is Daniel Becker. I am originally from Newark, Ohio. Obviously, a lot of talk about Ohio lately with
Right.
Bigfoot sightings. Originally from Newark, Ohio, and currently reside in Anchorage, Alaska. And how I got into Bigfoot research, like so many others, and I'm sure you've heard this story a million times, it all started with the show In Search of.
Hmm.
And seeing the Patterson Gimlin film. So as a child, I saw that on TV and I was absolutely mesmerized. So like others, you go to school and you're going to try to find the books in the library, which I attempted. And then I thought, you know what? I'll ask grandma. Grandma's always got good stories. I'm going to ask grandma about Bigfoot. And so I asked my grandma about it and she told me a story of growing up in the hollers of Kentucky just across the Ohio River. And she told me a story about a Bigfoot that used to travel through her area and would steal vegetables out of people's gardens.
Yeah.
And when she told me that story, I was hooked. And I had an opportunity as I grew older to actually go to that area, and she wasn't lying. It was way back in the holler. I mean,
Yeah.
way back when in dirt roads and abandoned houses and old cemeteries that are family cemeteries. It was just way back there, and so that brought seeing the actual area brought that story more to life. So once I heard Grandma's story, I was hooked. And then later on in life, excuse me, later on in life, I just kept up with it through reading and watching the occasional documentaries and when the Boy Scouts in Newark, Ohio, were out looking for wildlife, I was actually looking for Bigfoot tracks, and I didn't tell anybody that. It was kind of my secret,
Mhm.
but because I when I brought it up at school, I kind of got a couple jokes about it, but yeah, so as we move along, I would do a little bit of exploring every time I was out in the woods and, looking for signs, looking for the tracks, looking for the tree structures that I had seen on TV. And then when Animal Planet came along, and of course, the big show, you know, Finding Bigfoot, and When that came along, all of a sudden, that brought this hobby up to the mainstream. All of a sudden, people were talking about it now, and so that opened a lot more conversation channels. And as I said, I did my research, kind of alone on the way, and uh, jumping up here to Alaska, and I started looking around here, and I tried to reach out to researchers up here, but I really wasn't getting a lot of response. And I heard a gentleman on a podcast telling his story. His name's William Lunsford from Texarkana, Arkansas.
Mhm.
I heard this gentleman telling his story on a podcast, and it was so genuine, and it was unlike any story that I'd ever heard before. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to reach out to this guy and see if I can he'll answer some questions for me, because I was not being real successful in making contacts up here.
Cool.
And so I contacted William Lunsford, and he responded, and we started building a friendship. And he said, why don't you come on down here to Arkansas, and we'll take you out in our research area. So when I got down to Arkansas, um, William and another partner, Stephen Hill, they started really mentoring me in this hobby of ours. And they took me out to their research area, and they started teaching me the serious ropes of Bigfoot research. And that's really how I got started on this. And then when I would come back to Alaska, of course, I would do things up here as well. And yeah, it kind of took off from there. But I've been going back and forth down to Arkansas, and this place in Arkansas is just outside of Fouke, which is obviously world famous among Bigfoot researchers. So anytime we go out, and it's like we're almost guaranteed activity in this research area of ours. And when I go out with my partners down there, William Lunsford and Stephen Hill, every time is like going to school. So I've been very fortunate to be mentored by these gentlemen who I consider field generals in this hobby of ours.
Yeah, man, that's really cool. Yeah, and I do know of the name. It sounds very familiar. Yeah, yeah. So I do know of the name. I just don't think I've ever met him or even talked to him. But yeah, his name is very familiar. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I love that area. I've been out there a couple of times myself. Um, I've got, of course, I got friends out there, and we were talking about that earlier. I was one of the last people, if not the last person, to be on the Crabtree property, which was pretty cool because I think shortly, I mean, within months after I visited, uh, the widow wind up selling that property. So yeah, and I got to see the skeleton, the famous skeleton. Do you know about the skeleton?
Um,
Joe Crabtree had.
I've read about it.
Yeah, I got to see that thing. It was in a glass like container, and that thing still stunk. I mean, it still smelled. There was still a smell to it. Yeah, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah,
yeah,
Keith Crabtree is a very good friend of ours,
yeah.
and I've had the opportunity to visit with him at his house and his Keith Crabtree campouts and,
Mhm. Yeah.
stuff like that. Really, really great guy.
Mhm. Yeah, I've never been to one of the campouts. I don't think they've done them in the last couple of years. Um, but
And
yeah.
he's actually retired from the campouts
Oh, did he? Okay.
now. I think they're still carrying on
Hmm.
without him,
Okay.
but yeah, he's on to other things. And the last time I saw him was at the Nebraska Bigfoot Conference when
Hmm.
myself and William were speaking there last year, and Keith was also a speaker there. Just a wonderful guy. I've
Yeah.
got nothing but good things to say about that gentleman.
Yeah. I don't know anyone that doesn't have anything good to say about him.
Yeah,
Like we said too, he's just a big old teddy bear.
he is.
Yeah. I
He
mean, he's a
is.
big man, but I mean, he's just the nicest guy. He's a big old teddy bear. And if anyone hasn't met him, I suggest when you get a chance to meet him, you'll love him. He's a great guy. Um, but yeah. So how are things in Alaska? I mean, as far as the Bigfoot activity, I mean, how would you rate that?
Well, Alaska is a very unique place
Mhm.
for Bigfoot research, obviously, and it's it's such a big place. It all depends on what section of the state that you're in.
Mhm.
A majority of the Bigfoot sightings take place in the southeast,
Okay.
but they are throughout the state here. Now, the Bigfoot in Alaska have a reputation for being more on the aggressive side.
Okay.
And one of the theories is because of their lack of interaction with the human population.
Mm.
Whereas I noticed that down south, you know, you hear the sporadic reports, or at least I've heard the sporadic reports about Bigfoot that are aggressive sometimes, but I hear a lot more friendlier interactions, or nonchalant occasional interactions that happen down there. But up here, you know, the people that I've spoken to up here, oftentimes their interactions have been more on the negative side. For example, I was sometimes I like to put the podcast logo on the side of my truck when I'm out doing things, and it's to generate conversation,
Mhm.
And I was sitting in a parking lot once about to leave this office building, and one of the staff members who worked in that office came out. He's an Alaska Native gentleman, and he walked up to my vehicle and he looked at the logo of the podcast and he said, "Are you serious about this?" And I said, "Absolutely, I'm serious. I'm actually one of the hosts of this show." And he said, "Well, let me tell you what happened to me." And he told me a story about him and his girlfriend in the town of Yakutat, Alaska. And Yakutat is another one of those places you can only get to by boat or airplane. And he told me a story about him and his girlfriend in Yakutat. And I actually did a little stint out there with work, so I know that little town. And he told me he was out there in a vehicle with his girlfriend on a desolate road, one of those dirt roads out there. And he said that a Bigfoot came out from the brush behind the vehicle, slammed its hands down on the vehicle and started shaking it and started throwing a fit. And he said it scared his girlfriend so badly that she refuses to go back out there anymore. But he seemed relieved to be able to talk to somebody about this experience who wasn't going to judge him or mock him, but he said it is an experience that he will never ever forget. And I've heard stories from other people I've encountered as well that have claimed to have seen aggressive behavior from the Bigfoot in Alaska.
Just want to real quick give a shout out to Mr. Harry Green and to Memphis Song. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We do appreciate it. Yeah, man, that's really interesting. And but that kind of behavior I've also heard, in other places,
Yeah.
where they've hit cars and shook cars before, and yeah, that's very interesting on them doing that. And it's kind of, uh, I guess, kind of correlates with the other sightings and experiences that people have had. When you hear that happen in Alaska and you hear it happen here in Texas, right? It's the behavior kind of seems kind of the same. And um, but do you see any differences in the Bigfoot in Alaska from the differences you may have heard from, like, say, down here? And it could be anything from size to the way they look, or you know.
Well, in my opinion, the Bigfoot up here seem to be bigger,
Hmm.
and they seem to be more farther back in the wilderness.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and again, it all depends on what part of the state you're in, and the the landscapes and environments here go from rainforest in the southeast, mountains, to Arctic tundra. I mean, you've got it all. And one of the things I learned about Bigfoot in Alaska is in places that I thought there wouldn't be any Bigfoot activity, like in the farther northern areas in the tundra, I was actually incorrect.
Right.
In speaking to some native elders out of Kotzebue, they would tell me some stories about Bigfoot, and I was thinking, well, there couldn't be up here, but I was really wrong. And down in Bethel, down around Bethel area as well, and that around Bethel, it's a lot of tundra, and I didn't think there would be too many there, but there actually are. But by far, when you're talking about Bigfoot in Alaska, the question I get asked about the most is about Portlock, the most famous Alaska story there is. And people want to know, have you ever been out to Portlock? And back in years ago when they started coming out with these documentaries about Portlock, Alaska, and killer Bigfoot, and it kind of got that story regenerated. And by far, that's the thing. That's the topic that people ask me about the most when it comes to Bigfoot in Alaska. So Portlock is a very difficult place to get to. I would love to get out there and do research, but it's very difficult to get to, and it's very expensive to get to. So these documentaries that you see on TV, they got some bankroll behind them,
Mhm.
because one of the things you're going to have to do first and foremost is you have to get permission from the native corporation to go out there. So that's first and foremost, and that may or may not involve a donation of some type.
Mhm.
Then, at least if you're coming out of Anchorage, you got to drive several hours down to Homer, Alaska, and you've got to hire a ship and crew to take you out there. And that is going to be pricey, especially if they're going to be taking you out there and anchoring off the coast and staying out there. And some people I've heard do the drop off and come back, but it is going to cost you a lot of money. So we have kind of have a joke up here. You can send your kid to college, or you can go to Portlock.
Mhm.
But Portlock was abandoned officially, I guess you could say abandoned, back in 1950 when they closed the post office. And so the story, as many of your viewers are aware, the story is that allegedly Bigfoot were killing various people and hunters and terrorizing this village or this town, which led to its abandonment. Now, somebody asked me recently, oh, well, if you made it out to Portlock, how would you do your research? Well, if I made it out to Portlock, then I'd want to do my research not in the town itself or what's left of it. I would want to go farther back into the mountain areas and farther back into that interior area, and that's where I'd want to start my research, is back there. And who knows, maybe the descendants of this Bigfoot clan that allegedly did these acts are still active in the area. So if I ever made it out to Portlock, that would be my strategy. And it's tough terrain out there, tough terrain, but I'd want to start my research farther inland.
Yeah, just from like the maps that I've seen of Alaska, it's like topographical maps, and the terrain looks crazy, and it's a perfect environment for a creature like that to hide and never be seen, and um, and to be away from the people and civilization, and you could probably see why it would be a little bit more aggressive because like I said, it's just not used to being around people.
Yeah, and as a Bigfoot researcher up here, you've got to be extremely careful
Hmm.
because, as you know, we have large predators up here like bears,
Hmm.
and um, you've we have a saying up here. There are two things that'll kill you quickly in Alaska. One is weather, and the other is wildlife. And when you're out in the field here, you've got to be really cognizant of your surroundings and aware of your surroundings. And also, one of the challenges that come are, especially if you're not just Alaska, but any area that you have large predators, when you're out looking for tracks, sometimes, especially when they double step or something, sometimes the tracks of large predators can be mistaken for Bigfoot tracks.
Right.
So you really got to have a keen eye.
Hmm.
But like I said, two things that'll kill you in Alaska are weather and wildlife, not just the bears, but the moose as well. You've also got to be aware of the moose. And the moose, you would think as you're going through the woods that, they're so big that they would just pop out, but that's not always the case. You would be amazed at how these giant moose can blend in. I mean, I have actually walked up on them before and not seen them in the brush and just walked around a corner and they're there. And a moose will stomp you, you know, will stomp you. But so we've got those big bears to deal with and the moose to deal with as well. So you really got to be careful up here. Now, when I'm doing research down south, a whole new landscape of animal threats await. You know, there's the snakes, like our research area in Arkansas. These areas are not easy to get to. You've got to wade through brush and snakes all over the place, and then the wild hogs, which I was telling you before the show. I got chased up a tree by wild hogs one time when we were out investigating this guy's property down there, and then there's the ticks. Like, we don't have to deal with ticks up here, but down where you are, my partners and I pretty much have to go through a tick ritual after we've come in from the field. And so you've got the ticks, you've got the snakes, you've got in some places bear, and then of course there's the alligators. Like, when I first went down to Arkansas, I didn't think anything about alligators, right? And then we're in those areas near the Sulphur River, and I didn't know there were alligators up that far north, so I really got an education there.
Yeah, we went to my first time going to Arkansas. I was really surprised at the alligators there. I didn't realize they had. I mean, because we have alligators here in Texas, you
Right.
know, and the environment. Even though it was summertime, I just didn't think there would be that many alligators. But I mean, yeah, there was a lot of alligators and a lot of sign, and it was really crazy. And I was like, wow, Of course, the snakes were down there, and like I said, the ticks down here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We go through a ritual too. You go into the woods and we've been driving. We have a long sleeve shirt on. We look down. There's a damn tick crawling on you. I actually got home one time and I had a tick on my side, and luckily it didn't, give me any kind of disease or. But yeah, I was. I don't remember what I was doing, and I just happened like to hit it, and I felt like my finger got caught. I was like, "What? What is that?"
Oh
And
my
there
goodness.
was there was a doggone tick. So I mean, I took it off, and I went to the doctor the next day, and he's like, "Oh no, you're good." He made sure that I was good. So yeah.
Yeah, you really got to think about that kind of stuff when you're
Yeah.
a cryptid researcher down south.
Um, and also when we were in Fouke, we went to this. We were in Alex Smith Park area.
Yeah,
We were
Smith
out,
Park.
yeah, and we were out there, and we went through this little channel, and it was very narrow, and it actually the water was low that year, and so our canoes didn't quite make it because it was like really muddy and it was really shallow in that area. And one of my buddies got off. He goes, "You know what? I'm just gonna get off and pull you guys across, because it wasn't very far, maybe 10, 15 feet, something like that." He goes, "I'm just gonna." There was like three or four of us in 3 or 4 canoes, and so he pulled everybody across. Got back in his canoe, and um, we went about our business. We got back to the camp that night, and he goes into his tent to change. He had leeches on his legs.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, man. I was like, holy cow. So of course
Yeah.
everybody went to go look for leeches, but we didn't have any. But we figured it's because he jumped off and got in the mud.
One thing I noticed about the forest down there, and I noticed this on the first night in Arkansas, and when William Lunsford and Stephen Hill went out the very first time, it was at night, and the forest there at night is very, very loud, whereas up here, it's very, very quiet.
Right. Okay.
And so I was very surprised at that. And one
Really?
of the first things they started teaching me, and I recommend this for all researchers who are just getting into this. One of the first things they started teaching me were the sounds of the forest and learning to identify what animals that I was hearing.
Right.
Like they that's the first thing they started teaching me. And because I said, "Wow, it is really loud down here. It's 1 a.m. in the middle of hillbilly heaven, and there's so much noise." So they had to teach me what the sound of a barn owl was,
Right.
what the sound of a coyote was, what the sound of and this one really threw me off because the first time I heard a fox scream,
Hmm.
a fox vocalization, I thought it was a woman that was
Right.
screaming in the woods, and they're like, "Nope, that's a fox." But they started teaching me the sounds of the forest, and it's the very first thing I learned down there when starting to do research in the South.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I've actually got fox And I've actually heard them, myself just walking in the woods, and yeah, those fox scream. And if someone hasn't never heard of a fox scream or heard a fox scream, it's crazy. And then also some of the owls, I mean, you'd swear they were chimpanzees. I mean, you would swear, and I can see why people would think that they heard this vocal and they heard a chimpanzee, and I'm like, you probably heard a freaking owl, you know. And yeah, and my friend Lupe, he taught me that. Yeah, he told me about the owls, and he had told me a story that two owls actually fought right next to him. He was sitting out by the campfire, and two owls fell down next to him and were fighting. He goes, "If I hadn't been there, you would have thought it was two chimpanzees that were fighting because of the way they were, the way they sound." Yeah, and I can
Yeah,
see why people like, yeah,
they really had to tune my ears in
hmm,
to the sounds of the forest.
right,
And that was the very first lesson they taught me.
hmm. And then I mean, the crickets and the frogs, they can get extremely loud. I don't know if people haven't experienced that. That's a whole experience in itself. Just the way the crickets sound. Like I said, the frogs, it's crazy how loud they actually get.
We did end up hearing Bigfoot whooping. You
Hmm.
know, on many occasions we heard that, but there were other times where we would hear that, and my partners would say, "That's not a Bigfoot. That's a barn owl, is what you're hearing."
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
it was, like I said, anybody who's just getting into Bigfoot research, we always encourage them to learn those sounds of the forest.
right. Yeah, especially in the area you're going to be researching, whether you from the area or not. If you're like my primary search area is the San Houston forest, and even though I've been to a couple of other forests, yeah, I kind of made it my mission to know what's going on in the San Houston. Mhm,
Yeah, we actually developed something that we called the 5 T's of Bigfoot research. So one is tracks.
mhm,
And so, when you go into an area, obviously you're looking for tracks, but it's not just looking for the Bigfoot tracks.
mhm.
It is looking for the tracks that could belong to food sources of Bigfoot.
Right.
You know, learning to identify a deer track, learning to identify a coyote track.
Mhm,
It's not just the Bigfoot tracks. It's learning the tracks of the animals in the research area.
mhm.
And like up here where I am, outside of Anchorage, we don't have deer here. We have deer in other parts of the state, but and down there, learning the hog tracks. That was another
Right.
thing I had to learn. So tracks, and the second one is trees. A lot of Bigfoot researchers, one of the things they forget to do is look up. you know. And I remember a couple of years ago there was that footage that came out of the Carolinas where there was something up in the trees that was breaking all the branches and stuff. You could hear it, but you couldn't see anything. And so tracks, trees, it's looking for those tree structures, looking for those tree breaks, and a lot of a lot of times we focus in our tree breaks on what we call standalone tree breaks,
Mhm.
and these are tree breaks that are isolated, that seem to be broken, bent, or bent in isolation. They're not part of what could possibly be storm damage or anything like that, or animal interaction. So tracks, trees, trails, looking for those game trails, and looking for, uh, we kind of call them off-road trails. Off-road
Right.
trails are like where something has not followed a game trail, but just barreled through the brush,
Right. Yeah.
created a pathway because of their momentum going through the brush areas. So looking for those trails, and also knowing where the human trails are, knowing where the hiking trails are, because you want to see how close that human interaction is to your research area.
Mhm.
And another one is time, learning the times of your research area where cryptids are most active.
Mhm.
We've talked to people that said, in our areas, we seem to get more activity, at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then we've talked to other people who say, you know what, we've actually experienced activity in the daytime.
Mhm.
We've actually experienced it. So it's learning the times of your research area where cryptids seem to be most active. And and the last one is technology. Never be afraid to introduce new technology into your research. And whether that be audio, video, drone technology, never, such great technology is coming out there all the time, and it's great to hear the research that other people are conducting with new technologies.
Mhm.
So never be afraid to introduce new technology into your research. So tracks, trees, trails, time, and technology are our 5 T's of
The
Bigfoot
five
research that we
T's.
came up
Yeah.
with.
Hmm. Yeah,
Sorry
that's
to be
pretty
so
good.
long.
Oh no, man, that's great. I actually love that. I love that you explained that. Real quick, what's up, Miss Sandra? How are you doing? Thanks for tuning in. I hope you're doing well. Um, yeah, you mentioned that the trees. Um, my friend Walter, he had an experience here in the same Houston, or a sighting, and the one that he saw was actually huge for down this far. He said it was 9.5 feet tall, right? And when he told me about it, I was kind of like, you know what, the adrenaline pumping, whatever. And he told me that there was like this white spot on the tree, which is a fungus. And so I said, okay, we'll go and we'll measure, because he said that's where the creature's head was at. So we went and we measured it, and it was 9.5 feet tall to that spot, right? One of the craziest things, So um, that's become one of our main research areas, and we found a lot of great evidence in that area. And we actually found a hog with his head ripped off in that section. And then we found a tree that the branch was broken over the road, but it wasn't just broken, it was twisted like a dish rag. It was twisted and bent down. Um, of course, when I put that on the internet, everyone was like, well, an 18-wheeler hit it. I'm like, 18-wheeler isn't going down this road. There's just, because first of all, you can't even back out because it deads in. Um, and if an 18-wheeler went down the road, it would break every branch on the way in, right? And I had this little Chevy Colorado, and that thing was scraping both ends, both sides of the brush going down this little road. Um, and it was in the middle of July, so there wasn't no ice storm. And then if there was a hurricane, why just that one branch? Which there wasn't a hurricane there in that time anyway. But yeah, it was one of the weirdest things we saw in that area. Even still to this day, and we found tons of tracks in that area. But yeah, it's become
Standal
one.
I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, it's been like our favorite research area.
Standalone tree breaks are something that I find a lot of up here
Hmm.
when I'm out in the field. And one of the interesting aspects of those standalone tree breaks that I've been discovering up here is that I'm finding them more in that are kind of going in a pattern
Hmm.
through the woods and
Right.
almost like a trail-like pattern.
Hmm.
There'll be one here, and then 50 yards from there, there'll be another and another
Right.
and another. And of course, Bigfoot researchers debate all day long,
Right.
about why these creatures do these tree breaks, what they're used for. Bigfoot researchers debate that all day long.
Hmm.
But like you mentioned about the twisting,
Hmm.
you'll see twisting, you'll see bark that's kind of missing in the area where a hand would grab.
Right. Yeah.
That's one of the things I've noticed up here. But even in the wintertime, I've come across that just recently.
Mhm. Yeah, and then you talk about time also, but not just like time of day, but I think time of year. So like here, especially like here in Texas, it seems like September, October activity picks up, and then like right around this time in the springtime, the activity picks up again. And I've actually I had a map in my old house. I had a map, and I had like all the sightings that I personally talked to people, and there's like a big corridor that runs from the East Texas all the way up to like Texarkana. Um, and I mean, it's almost a straight line. So I've always wondered if that's just the path that they take, if it's some kind of corridor, or I don't know, maybe it's just the environment, just it being East Texas. I mean, have you ever noticed anything like that?
Well, you are in Cryptid Central,
Hmm.
and I really think a lot of people think, well, it's the Pacific Northwest. Everybody's thinking Washington and Oregon. And I used to think like that years ago, but no longer. After
Hmm.
doing research in the South, the southern United States is, as far as I'm concerned, is like the mecca of cryptid activity. And our research area in Arkansas, we call it Ground Zero. That's our nickname for it.
Mhm.
And I actually call it the Amazon of America
Right.
because you can go 3 feet into these woods and just vanish
Right.
and just absolutely vanish. And anything could hide in those woods.
Right.
And our research area, and I know this phrase is overused, but when you go into our research area, it is charged. That's the best way I can describe it. And you may have experienced this in your research areas too, where you can just feel something different. There's something different in the atmosphere. There's something different in how things feel there. So again, like I said, ours is called Ground Zero, and it is so active that we're almost guaranteed activity every time we go there. You
Mhm.
know, and we have cameras there. Obviously, everybody's got cameras. So we say the Bigfoot are crafty, and you need to be crafty too.
Right.
So what we do with our cameras, they're not just on trees, but they're in trees.
Mhm.
And they're in trees, they're in brush piles. And I let my partners deal with the brush pile ones because of the snakes. Like,
Right. Yeah.
and all the times I've been down there and we've been out, my eyes are still not tuned
Yeah.
to look for snake activities and snakes. And so the cameras that are in the brush, I let my partners deal with those, in case there's a snake in there. But we've got them, cross patterns and various places. But our game cameras have picked up things that we just can't explain.
Mhm.
Creatures that we just got no explanation for.
Right.
And it's been a very, very fascinating experience in going through all these photos and seeing things that are like, what is that? And this is actually the place that made me a believer in Dogman.
Okay.
And I wasn't sold on the whole Dogman phenomenon. And it wasn't until I started going down there and I started seeing the track evidence and things that were being caught on our game cameras that looked canine like,
Right.
that we just had no explanation for. And my partners actually ended up having a couple sightings of Dogman, and Dogman seems to be popping up more on the cryptid radar as of late. And when I was speaking at the Nebraska Bigfoot Conference last year, I was very surprised at how many people were asking questions about Dogman. Is now in your part of Texas, is Dogman a thing there?
Yes, especially between San Antonio and Austin area. Um, that's like Dogman Central, but we have had sightings in the San Eastern Forest. Not a lot, just like a handful of sightings. Um, and of course, there's been a handful of sightings in East Texas. And I'm trying to find. So in February 1st, I just found this text message. My buddy sent me some pictures. He lives in an area. I don't want to give out too close to it, but it's near Jacksonville, Texas. He has a big piece of property. It's his hunting property. It's been in his family at least for 3 generations. I know it was his grandfather's, then his dad's, now it's his. Uh, and he told me that growing up, he had some strange stuff happen. And he sent me some pictures February 1st. And there's a big hulking figure on his game cam, and you can see ears, like big pointed ears. He's like, I've never seen anything like that. He goes, what do you think this is? And I told him, I said, I think it's got to be a dog man. It's got to be. Um, it's like it's not super clear, of course, but it's one of the better pictures where you can see defined pointed ears on it.
Another thing that we experience that many researchers have experienced, and you've probably experienced it as well, is interference with electronics. And we actually came up with a term for it because we'd heard about it so much and it's happened to us. We started calling it CEI, Cryptid Electronic Interference.
Mhm.
That's the term we came up for it. And our cameras have been interfered with. And also a couple years ago, we introduced drones into our research, and that's real popular now, but new thing for us. And I sent up the first drone over the research area, and all of a sudden it started having recording problems, over a certain area. And it was having recording problems, and I was trying to take photographs and take video and all that stuff. And when I brought it back, the video was just gone. And some maybe two of the photos came out, and I thought, wow, and these are DJI drones. They're not like, dime store drones. These are, expensive ones. And I thought, well, maybe there's something wrong with the unit, right? So I put that aside, and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to send up the second drone, which was actually the next model up. And so sent the second drone out there, and again got over that area that I was trying to target, and again having problems with the recording, having problems with the still photographs, and brought it back, and all this stuff that I'd recorded, thought I was recording, was gone. It just wasn't there. And a couple of the photos came out, but most of them did not. And I'm like, okay, one drone having an issue, yeah, that could happen. But two drones having an issue, and then and like I said, these weren't dime store drones. These were DJI drones that were expensive. And in addition to that, our cameras have occasionally, you know, batteries dying without explanation, things going blurry, blacking out. I mean, lots of researchers talk about CEI, but that seemed to be a big challenge, with the drones in our areas. And of course, you always have to be your first skeptic. Always have to be your first skeptic. So when our drones started failing, we're thinking, okay, could it be interference from Wi-Fi signals or other types of cellular signals that are perhaps in the area? But the area is so isolated that we had to rule that out. But that CEI is a real thing. Have you guys experienced the same, I'm guessing?
So yes, but I have another theory, and I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but I have another theory. I think, and I hate to get into the whole conspiracy thing because I'm not a big conspiracy theorist person at all, but I think the powers that be uh, have a lot to do with that. And I say that because prior to me meeting Walter, which I've known Walter now, I don't know, 4 years, maybe closer to 5 years, because it was shortly after I started doing this show. No, closer to 5 years, because that's when I met my current wife. The first time I met my current wife, I went to her apartment. That's the first time I talked on the phone with Walter. Funny story. But anyway, um, so um, and I've had little trouble with cameras and stuff like that too, but nothing major. But when I met Walter and we started going to this research area. We both bought the big pack of double A. He bought a pack, and I don't remember, it's 18 or 24 batteries. You know what I'm talking about. You probably bought them yourself, right? Um, and we had night vision camera. We went through those whole batteries, and none of them worked, right? And
Wow.
he bought his somewhere else. I bought mine because he lives out towards the Sam Houston, which is like a 45-minute drive for me to his house, and I live here in Houston. So I bought my batteries here. He bought his out there. Um, After we left that area, we went back to his house, and I said, "Man, let's try these batteries again." Everything worked, right? But we've had trouble with our camcorders. We had trouble with our digital recorders. Um, and I brought this up to some researchers that have been researching the Sam Houston, for decades. Their family is pretty well known here, and they've told me that they've had run-ins with the powers that be, and that they've uh, basically shut their equipment off. Um, so, and I say that because after Walter had his sighting, and he contacted Will Jevning first, and Will says, "Hey, I got a guy there in your area." Walter called me. Walter got two phone calls telling him to shut the f up, right? Um, and then we had stuff on our phones because at first we couldn't find the location because he hadn't gone there like in 3 or 4 months, and he because he was scared, he didn't want to go back, so he couldn't remember exactly where it was at, and we wind up started driving around that whole little area until we found this the the dirt road. We went down there. We marked it, right? I marked it on my phone. He marked it on his phone, so we wouldn't forget. And I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, when we went back, we couldn't find it on our phone again. So, and then we had other stuff come up missing on our phones, and we didn't have it on our phone. We had it on our Google Drive, and we had pictures and notes and stuff like that. And I was like, "Hey, man, check out your drive. Is it still on there?" And he's like, "Man, it's gone. It's gone." So we started going back to using like little flash drives and the portable drives that we keep our stuff in when we go to that area, because stuff comes up missing. That's all I'll say. And I don't really like to get to and talk about that too much, because I don't want to get in any trouble, because I've heard people getting in some trouble for talking about it.
I just realized my camera was backwards, so I just changed it. Um, so I'll tell you a story about somebody that I knew in a three-lettered government agency. So there was a gentleman that was at a high executive level in one of those government agencies that oversees a lot of wilderness areas, and he was up here in Alaska, and he'd also been at high executive levels in several Western states. And every time I would go over to their house, I would try to corner him on the topic of Bigfoot. And I I would say, look, you know, you've been in the federal government over 20 years at high executive levels. Your agency oversees thousands and thousands of acres of wilderness. I said, you've got to know something. You've got to know something. And I kid you not, every time I brought up the topic, he'd look down at the floor and he'd say, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. That's all I could ever get out of him. And I would say, your silence speaks louder than words. And I would just joke around with him, and I said, what you need to do is retire from that three-lettered agency and write a book, but every time I'd always try to corner him and get him to say something, but he never would. But he would never look at me in the face. He'd always look at the floor and go, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. But and we like to ask our guests, do you think that the government knows these creatures exist, and do you think they're keeping it under wraps? We always, the guests that are on our podcast, we always ask that question. You know,
And yeah, I've talked to people out in Sam Houston who have had run-ins, and there was actually an official, a government-held official, who got rolled up on by guys in black SUVs and told to get the hell out of there. And he's like, "No, this is me. This is my title, right?" He told them and they're like, "We don't care who you are. You need to get out of here and get out of here right now." Yeah, and I was like, "Holy crap, man!" An elected official told by these people in a black SUV in tactical gear, "You need to get the hell out of here right now, or you will go to jail." I was like, "Holy shit, that's pretty wild. That is wild shit, man." Um, and my friend Kimbo, he passed away last year. Good guy. Really good researcher. He's actually got some really good audio. Uh, he was out camping one night down this certain road that's very popular here, and he said this car pulled up, and they got out and they packed up. I mean, they unpacked, and he was they're maybe like 100 yards down the road from him. He says in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, he hears their door slam, and the car takes off and hauls ass down this dirt road. And daylight comes, this truck pulls up, and 2 kids get out, and he calls them kids. They're probably like in their early 20s, and they came down to Kimbo's camp. They're like, "Hey, man, were some people out here?" And they were like, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, my dad told me that there was a Bigfoot sighting out here." He's like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, my dad told me that some people saw Bigfoot, and they took off in the middle of the night, you know." And that night, when Kimbo checked his recorder from that night, he got a really good an owl that was hooting, and then he got this. So the owl was like whoo whoo whoo, right? And then you hear this whoo whoo whoo, that same night. And So that kid told him that his dad worked for the state of Texas, and he was an upper official in the uh, I don't want to say the exact branch, but he dealt with the wildlife, and the parks. So that was a pretty interesting night for Kimbo. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
I think
definitely.
yeah, so I think that I think the government knows. I don't know really why they're covering it up, and part of me thinks that, and I almost say that a big part of me thinks that they just don't know what they are, you know, and I think that's what it really is. I just don't think that the government really, really, truly knows. I think they've probably have captured some. We've all heard those rumors, but I just don't think maybe the government just doesn't know what to classify them is, and so and maybe they just don't even care really.
Yeah, we really enjoy hearing people's thoughts and opinions about the topic of what they think a Bigfoot is, and what do they think the impacts of public disclosure would be if the government. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about UFOs right now, and upcoming possible disclosure by the current administration. And so, just in conversation, with other researchers and some of our guests, we've said, what do you think the impacts of disclosure would be if the government all of a sudden came out and said, "Oh, by the way, these creatures are real." So, what do you think the impacts would be? I think you're muted.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
there
I,
we go.
I think it would depend on what they are and what they're classified as. If they're like a non-human primate, um, I think it wouldn't be as impactful. I think they would probably shut down some forest and maybe shut down some logging. Um, because from what I understand, from what I've heard, is that when there's a discovery of like a new species of something like that, it goes automatic to the top of the list for the endangered species until they can determine whether or not they really are endangered. But in that time, whatever's going on in that area would have to stop. Um, and logging actually, I think it's like a third of our economy. Um, but then if it's some kind of a human, right? Now you're talking about human rights, and that's a whole nother ball of wax right there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the responses we've gotten to the question has been really interesting. And like I said, we love hearing people's perspective on it. And like you mentioned about the economic impact, you'd have everything having to do with natural resources, the logging industry, paper industry, oil industry. I mean, all this stuff might be affected. And then you'd have the human impact, which would be you'd have people that were terrified because these things are near their homes,
Right.
and they'd be demanding that the government do something about it. And everything that was once myth would all of a sudden become fact overnight. And the human impact, then you'd have a bunch of good old boys somewhere grabbing their rifles, going out and trying to hunt one
Hmm.
and take one out. So you definitely see the economic possible economic impacts, possible human impacts. It's a really
Yeah.
interesting subject matter.
And then you would have to look at the fact that then people would say, well, the government knew about these creatures this whole time, right? And people have gone missing, right?
Oh yeah.
Possible lawsuits, maybe. Yeah. So there's actually it's a quite the tangled web that the government has woven if they've known about these creatures for all this time.
Yeah, there would definitely be a ripple effect,
Mhm.
you know. And you raise an excellent point, obviously with things like what is a missing 411, and David Pilates, I always say his name wrong. Pilates,
Yeah, Pilates.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I always say his name wrong, but a lot of these cases of missing hikers and missing people, people are going to want to know, is any of this related to these Bigfoot? And I think actually some of them are. That's just my opinion, not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to put a number on how many people are missing because of Bigfoot, but I think Bigfoot, is definitely, a factor in all of this.
So in your research and in the interviews that you've conducted, obviously we like to say on our podcast, there's no wrong answer. When we ask all of our guests, what do you think Bigfoot is? And in our circle, we have people all across the spectrum, and we have people in the North American primate side of the house, the extraterrestrial side of the house, the interdimensional being side of the house, the Nephilim descendant side of the house, the Neanderthal, and just a million theories out there. But what is one of the theories that you've heard to be most prevalent in the people that you've spoken to, and what do you think about it?
So I think, just like the people that I've spoken to firsthand, I think that it's a non-human primate, and and I because a lot of the behaviors that it exhibits seem to be more of ape-like, or everything from throwing the way they throw a fit, the way they throw stuff at people, and I mean they've thrown feces at people. Uh, you know, just a lot of those behaviors seem more like a non-human primate type of behavior. So that's what I would say that they are. I think they're a flesh and blood creature, and you know, just like you've mentioned, I've heard a million theories on what they could be. Um, and I think if they're all of that, they're like the greatest Marvel character, ever. But I personally just think that they're a flesh and blood creature, and there's probably a little bit more to them than what we know. But overall, they're just a normal, natural creature that just the forest ninja, as you've probably heard too. And of course, like in the forest, like you said, especially like down here, it's so thick. I mean, you could put a T-Rex down here and you would never see it.
Yeah, my partner likes to say that you could hide an elephant in the woods of Arkansas and not be able to see it.
Yeah, for
Hi, how are
sure.
you doing, Greg?
Yeah, Greg's
Um,
a great guy.
yeah, the one of the interesting things that we've noticed in the topics of Bigfoot and what they could possibly be is out of all the theories we've talked about on our podcast, the one theory that gets people more angry than any of them, at least it's been our experience, is the Nephilim connection theory. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just because it's from a biblical perspective, but when we had L.A. Marzulli on and and Derek Gilbert, so L.A. Marzulli and Derek Gilbert coming from a biblical perspective and talking about the possible Nephilim connection, not that the Bigfoot are Nephilim, but that they could be possible descendants of them. For some reason, that topic, you can talk about extraterrestrial, no problem. Interdimensional being, no problem. North American primate, no problem. But when you suggest that these creatures are somehow related to the Nephilim, all of a sudden, segments of people, they just come unglued. And I can remember we got an email from somebody, I'm never watching your show again. The Bigfoot aren't Nephilim. And like your platform, our platform is a safe space for everybody to express their thoughts, views, theories, and opinions and experiences without judgment or without ridicule, But regardless of what side of the house you're on, we just noticed that the Nephilim connection theory is the one that triggers people. I don't know if you've experienced that. I hope you haven't, but we have, and it's just like, my goodness, you don't have a problem with Bigfoot theory that they're an extraterrestrial, but all of a sudden you got a problem if they're anywhere near the Nephilim. And like one of the theories is, I'm originally from Newark, Ohio, and Newark, Ohio is a place where we have the mounds, the ancient mounds that are there. And one of the theories is, and again I say theory, one of the theories is if you go back to biblical times when Joshua and Caleb were pushing into the promised land. When the spies came back from the promised land, they were terrified They said, we're like grasshoppers. They saw the giants there and they were absolutely terrified. Well, when the time came to push into the promised land and Joshua and Caleb were pushing into the promised land, God told them, wipe out everything, kill everything, you know. And the theory is when Joshua and Caleb pushed into the promised land, the giants that were there that heard about what was going on farther south, they fled, and they fled to various places in the world, including the Ohio Valley, allegedly. And so one of the theories is that some of these Bigfoot could be descendants of those giant tribes that fled the promised land when Joshua and Caleb pushed in. And it's just one of the many theories that are out there. But like I said, for some reason, that's the Nephilim connection theory or the biblical perspective theories are what triggers people. And that is just a absolutely fascinating observation.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard anyone get mad about that. I think I've heard more people get mad about them being some kind of paranormal creature than I've heard.
Oh, the woo side of the house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've heard. Yeah, but yeah, and I've heard the Nephilim thing too. And what's the other one that they're Gigantopithecus, right? I've heard that one too.
Oh, right.
And I kind of would kind of like lean in towards that probably. Also, yeah, but yeah, I don't think I've ever made anybody mad, or I don't think anyone's ever gotten mad over what a guest has said. But
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. They
you make a good point, and we're already a little bit past the hour, but I do want to ask you, what do you think about the Kandahar giant story?
When I first heard that story, I heard it on L.A. Marzulli's channel, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And I've actually, obviously we have military here in Alaska. There's a base, just a few miles away from where I am, and I've asked some of the veterans who were over there if they'd ever heard anything about it, if they'd ever heard any stories about it or anything like that. Unfortunately, the ones that I spoke to had never had, but I think it's possible that this is accurate. It sounds like there's been some interviews with some credible people having to do with that, like one of the cargo pilots apparently, and that transported this being. But I definitely, given that part of the world and how remote it is, I could definitely see that being a possibility. But what do you think of it?
I don't know what to really think of it. I don't know if it's true or not. Um, Man, I would love for it to be true. I guess. I mean, I'm don't want someone being killed, of course, um, but I would love for it to be true. But I had a family member who was in Afghanistan, and when he came back home, I was the first person he contacted, and he was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of the Kandahar giant?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I have." And he goes, "The people over there believe in it." And I'm like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "The people
Oh,
that
wow.
told, yeah," he said, "the people that told him, not just the people of Afghanistan, but the military people that he talked to were like, we don't go to this area by ourselves. We go with, several groups of military." And yeah, so yeah, that's exactly what he told me. He goes, the villagers there told him about it and told him, don't go to this area. And people in the military told him, we don't go to that area by ourselves. Yeah. So yeah, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is. One of the things I've learned along the way, well, actually, I've learned a lot along the way, but one of the things I've learned along the way in cryptozoology is never speak in absolutes, because what you think is true today might not be true tomorrow. You may uncover some new piece of evidence or have a new experience that completely changes your perspective. So when when you get told something that you don't necessarily agree with right offhand, at least be open-minded enough to take it under consideration. And we see um, the internet trolls, automatically, want to condemn everything. But condemnation without investigation is not an act of wisdom, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right about that. And there's like a lot of things that I don't know anything about, right? And I had my last guest I talked to, I was like, you know what? I forgot what we're talking about. I said, I don't know about that subject. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not gonna look into it. And so I can't really make an opinion about it one way or the other, Uh, and the same thing with like this, Afghanistan, the Kandahar giant. All I know is the stories that probably we've all heard, everyone has heard. I don't know how much investigating I'm going to do on it. I probably will never do any more investigation than what I've been told and what I've heard. So I can't really make a definitive answer. And like I said, I would love for it to be true, of course, but I just don't know.
I have a lot of interaction with military here, and when I cross those veterans who've been over there, I'm always asking that question. And hey, have you ever heard? Have you ever heard? And maybe one day I'll get lucky, and a veteran will say, "Let me tell you what I heard." You know, who knows?
Yes, sir. But man, like I said, we've already gone over this hour. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your channel and your podcast and how people can find you and any kind of contact information you want to give out.
All right. So the name of our podcast is the Cryptid Wilderness Research Podcast. I'm the main host, and my co-host, his name is Matt Slater. He's out of Quincy, Washington, and our biggest platform really is TikTok, and we're also on YouTube. We do our longer episodes on YouTube, but our big platform is TikTok, and my partners, William Lunsford and Stephen Hill, my research partners, are down there in Arkansas, just out of Texarkana. And William has a new book out. It's called Searching for the Unfindable, Finding the Impossible. And this is his second book. And if you, those of you who are familiar with William Lunsford, he's been on all the big TV shows and all that stuff. He is just a wealth of knowledge in cryptozoology. So highly encourage you to pick that up. And he will be speaking at the Nebraska Bigfoot Conference later on in April. And I think I might be there. Haven't quite decided if I'm going to make it yet, but I might be there as well. Upcoming here in 2026, I will be on the TV show Paranormal Caught on Camera on Discovery, and that's going to be a great opportunity. And I have to say, when I was interviewing for that show, I thought they were going to be kind of you know ridiculing a little bit and have that attitude, but they were actually very, very, very nice and very professional. And I'm going to be on that show talking about one of the photographs that we got in our research area in Arkansas that we call Ground Zero. And many people call this the gorilla picture. That's what it kind of got nicknamed by my boss at work. So that is upcoming here in 2026. So it's Paranormal Caught on Camera. And yeah, so if you get the chance to pick up my partner's book, highly recommend it. It's full of that Southern charm and humor, and a lot of education in there as well. A lot of photographs too. A lot of good photos from our game cameras that are out in our research area, and alleged Gugway, Dogman, Bigfoot. Great read. Great read. So yeah, you can find us on TikTok. You can find us on YouTube, and you can email us at cryptidwr@gmail.com. And also, if you have any questions about cryptid research and you're just trying to make a connection, one of the things we have is our Cryptid Wilderness Research Network. We call it our CWR network. And what that is just a bunch of researchers that are in cooperation with each other and not competition. Life is all about connections. And like me, I don't know a lot about the audio part of the research, but I know I can call James Lady from the Michigan Aboriginal Project, who's really good with that stuff, and get advice. It's all about connections, and it's all about working together and cooperating with each other, because sometimes the Bigfoot research community can get a little nasty, and unfortunately, but we all need to be working together, and we all have the same goal, and that's proving that these creatures exist. So if you need a connection, feel free to email us. We'll help you in any way that we can. Remember, you are only one connection away from your dream. Life is all about connections.
Very cool, man. Dude, it was really great having you on. I know we probably could have talked for another hour about this stuff, as we started going, stuff started, all these little rabbit holes start popping up and you can start
Right.
going down them. Yeah, it was really cool, man. Really great having you on. I'll try to
Thank
have
you
you
so
back
much for
on
the
again.
opportunity.
Yeah, of course, man. And everyone else, my next show will be on the 22nd, which is a Sunday. I'll have a guy on. We'll be talking about UFOs. So yeah, you guys stay tuned for that. And don't go anywhere, Daniel. Don't hang up quite yet. And everyone else, I will see you later. You guys have a great night.